Welcome to Whispered Clues. Tonight we step into the world of Sherlock Holmes in The Portrait That Changed Its Face, a canvas that shifts, a crime unseen, a truth waiting beneath the paint. Where in the world are you joining us from? Now pour yourself something warm and let the mystery begin. The rap upon our door was so sudden that even Holmes's bow to his violin halted mid-note. The strings quivered with the echo, a soft lament that trembled into silence as Mrs. Hudson's steps approached below. Holmes glanced at the clock, one brow inclining. "Too early for creditors, too late for tradesmen," he murmured, and set the instrument aside. The knock came again, 3 measured taps each, precisely spaced, as though dictated by a metronome of anxiety. When our landlady ushered in the visitor, I noted first, not the man, but the object. He bore a portrait shrouded in brown paper, bound with string, held as one might cradle a sleeping child. He was of middle years, neat in attire but frayed in nerve. His hands, though gloved, betrayed a tremor that spoke of exhaustion rather than age. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," Holmes inclined his head, motioning him to the chair nearest the hearth. "Pray sit. You have brought with you something that demands secrecy or guilt," the man's voice caught. "Perhaps both, sir. My name is Charles Dayton, of Upper Norwood." This, he gestured toward the wrapped frame, was my late wife's portrait. "I beg you not to uncover it yet." The fire crackled, its rhythm joining the faint hum from the violin string still vibrating upon the table. Holmes steepled his fingers. "You fear what you might see beneath the paper." "I fear what I already have seen," Dayton whispered. Holmes leaned forward, interest awakened like a flame-fed new air. "Proceed, Mr. Dayton." The man drew a breath as though steadying himself on the edge of confession. "The painting was done 3 years ago by a friend of the family, a certain Mr. Harcourt of the Grosvenor School. My wife, Clara, sat for him during a summer when we were not happy. I saw the flicker of guilt pass over his features. She died last winter, suddenly of a fever," he went on. "Since then the portrait has hung in our drawing-room, untouched. Yet 3 nights past I returned home late to find that the face upon the canvas was no longer hers." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Altered? In what manner?" The likeness utterly changed. It bore a faint sneer, the mouth drawn cruelly to the eyes. They were not Clara's eyes at all. They watched me. He clasped his gloved hands until the leather creaked. I summoned a friend to see if grief had played some trick. But he too recoiled. The next morning the expression was gone, as if nothing had occurred. The violin string finally ceased its hum. Holmes rose, pacing lightly. "You have, of course, considered physical tampering? A servant, perhaps, or your Mr. Harcourt?" "None would dare," said Dayton. "Moreover, the canvas shows no brushwork, no alteration visible. Only the change itself." "And tonight?" Holmes asked softly. "I brought it here, sir. I cannot abide its presence for another hour." Holmes halted beside the covered frame, fingertips brushing the coarse paper. "You did not wish me to uncover it in your sight, I think?" Dayton nodded rapidly. "Because it may do so again. I cannot trust my own eyes." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, note the tone, not hysteria but dread, distinction of importance." Then to our client, "Was your wife of excitable temperament, gentle but proud?" "She mistrusted Harcourt, though she would not say why." "Jealousy? Not of me in the portrait. She said it felt alive." The last word hung in the room like frost. Holmes's expression did not change, yet I saw the calculation behind his stillness. He circled the frame once, listening perhaps to something only he perceived, the faint rasp of twine, the soft tick of our clock sinking with Dayton's shallow breaths. "A singular business," he said at last. You perceive, Watson, the symmetry of an artist, a husband, a wife, and a work of art that refuses to remain inert. The elements of obsession are present, so too, perhaps, those of crime. Dayton looked up sharply. Crime? Every mystery that touches the nerves must eventually touch the law, Holmes replied. Tell me, who knew the painting was to be brought here tonight? No one. I left at dusk, unseen. Holmes smiled faintly. Then someone will notice its absence by dawn. He pulled the bell rope. Mrs. Hudson, if you please, have the spare room prepared. Mr. Dayton will remain our guest until morning. Dayton half rose in protest. I cannot. You must, said Holmes, for if the portrait changes again, it shall not do so without witnesses. He turned back to me as the fire shifted and a soft crack echoed from the paper-wrapped frame, a subtle, splitting sound like paint tightening in cold air. Holmes's eyes met mine, gleaming. There, Watson, the case announces itself. The faint crack became a sigh, almost human. Holmes's hand hovered an inch from the wrapping. Do you hear it? He murmured. I nodded. The canvas moved. Holmes smiled without mirth. Then we shall not sleep tonight. The sound came again longer, deeper, as if something within strained to breathe. Holmes extinguished the lamp, and the room filled with the quiet pulse of the unseen picture. The darkness deepened until the portrait stood as a shape alone, outlined faintly by the embers. Holmes motioned me to remain still. Every sound in the room grew painfully distinct, the ticking clock, the faint draw of breath from Dayton, the creak of old floorboards beneath our weight. Then from within that shrouded frame came a sound not unlike the slow contraction of fabric under strain a sigh, followed by silence. Holmes whispered, Observing, what's in the paper covering it moves though no current passes through the room. It may be settling, I murmured. Paper settles once, not twice, he replied. He stepped forward, every motion deliberate, and with the precision of a surgeon cut the twine holding the wrapping. The brown paper loosened but clung, as if resisting its own unveiling. Holmes peeled back a corner, revealing a triangle of the painting within. Even in that dim light, I saw the ghostly shimmer of varnish, and beneath it, the upper curve of a woman's face. Dayton turned away. For God's sake, cover it again. Holmes did not move. You fear the sight, yet fear more what it will reveal. I tell you it changes, sir. The eyes, Holmes's voice softened. Then let us look together. He struck a match, its hiss sharp as the pulse that had haunted the room since his violin fell silent. The flame cast a tremulous glow upon the portrait. It was indeed that of a woman dark-haired, graceful, and composed, her expression serenely remote. Yet even as we gazed, the shadow of the flame across her mouth gave a strange illusion of movement, as though her lips suppressed a secret too cruel to utter. Holmes tilted the match lower, studying the eyes. Curious, he murmured. The pigment here, you see, Watson, has cracked unevenly, almost as if from heat. Or from age, I suggested. Age does not select emotion, he said. Yet this crack runs precisely along the line of a smile that was never painted. Dayton's voice quivered. Then you see it too. I see that what you call a change might be the deliberate outcome of an artist's deceit, Holmes answered. This Harcourt described him. A charming fellow, smooth-spoken, and once intimate with our circle. He admired Clara too openly, I fear. But she rejected his attention. And after her death? He wrote offering sympathy and to restore the portrait should it ever need retouching. I ignored him. Holmes let the match fall to the grate, its brief flare lighting his eyes. Watson, we shall pay Mr. Harcourt a visit tomorrow, but for tonight, let us test the truth of this animation. You mean to keep watch? I asked. He nodded. I have observed that guilt and art both breathe differently after midnight. The hours crept forward with agonizing slowness. Dayton dozed uneasily in the armchair, his head drooping over clasped hands. Holmes sat rigid beside the painting, a single candle burning low. I confess my own eyes grew heavy, yet a faint sound recalled the same minute creak as before, but drawn out, continuous. Holmes raised a hand. "Do you perceive it, Watson?" "Yes, it comes from the canvas itself." He brought the flame nearer. "See the surface swelling slightly, then subsiding. There is movement beneath the varnish." I stared, astonished, as a faint tremor ran across the painted cheek, as if some inner film expanded. Then came a soft popping noise, and a bubble of resin burst near the corner of the mouth. For an instant it gave the grotesque semblance of a grin. Holmes's voice was low but firm. A chemical process, not the supernatural, possibly applied deliberately to simulate life, perhaps some resinous mixture sensitive to heat or moisture, a device to unnerve the guilty or unhinged. Dayton awoke with a cry, seeing the contorted smile. "It mocks me, don't you see?" Holmes caught his wrist. "Compose yourself, sir. If someone engineered this deception, it was meant precisely to elicit that reaction." He leaned closer to the frame, examining the lower edge. "Watson, note this irregular line. The canvas has been loosened and restretched. Then someone tampered with it, undoubtedly. And recently, there are fresh particles of varnish along the tacking edge." Dayton's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then I am not mad." "No," said Holmes, "only chosen." The words struck him silent. Holmes set the candle aside and folded the paper back over the painting. "You will leave this with me. I intend to see what the morning light reveals when the heat of the fire is gone. Watson, accompany Mr. Dayton to his room." As I guided our shaken visitor down the passage, he clutched my sleeve. "If it changes again, promise you'll destroy it." "I promise only observation," I said, though my own nerves were not untroubled. When I returned, Holmes was still before the veiled portrait, head bowed in thought. "The mechanism of deceit interests me less than its motive," he said without looking up. "Why now, months after her death, someone wishes to revive guilt or fear? Could it be Harcourt? Possibly. But if he sought reconciliation, he would appeal to vanity, not terror. There is another hand in this." He fell silent. The candle guttered low. Outside, a carriage rumbled faintly along Baker Street and faded. In that hush, the sound returned, the faint pulse beneath the paper, rhythmic as breathing. Holmes's gaze lifted. "That, Watson, is no chemical trick," he said quietly. "It repeats too regularly." I strained to hear a soft double beat, almost like a heart. Holmes moved to the door. "Fetch my magnifying lens." When I handed it to him, he slid a thin blade beneath the frame's backing and pried open a narrow space. The sound grew louder, unmistakably organic. Holmes's face hardened. "So," he murmured, "the portrait hides a living thing." I recoiled. Alive? In a sense? Perhaps an animal confined? Or a device that imitates respiration? Either way, it explains the heat distortion. He inserted a finger and drew out a tiny metal cylinder no longer than a cigar stub, its surface warm. Within it, a faint mechanical ticking continued. "An ingenious little contrivance," he said, holding it to the light. "A clockwork bellows, perhaps, to suggest a pulse. Whoever placed it there understood psychology and cruelty." Dayton appeared suddenly at the doorway, drawn by our voices. "What have you found?" Holmes held the object aloft. "Proof that the devil may inhabit gears as easily as guilt. This was meant to persuade you that your wife's spirit moved within the paint." Dayton sank into a chair, burying his face. "Then someone meant to destroy me, or to drive you toward a certain act," Holmes said grimly. "Tell me, Mr. Dayton, whom would your ruin most benefit?" The man looked up, tears shining in the dimness. "My wife's brother Henry Vale. He hated me for marrying her."
Holmes nodded slightly. "Then we have our next call." He replaced the cylinder upon the mantel and drew the paper tighter about the portrait. The faint ticking still persisted, like the last beat of a wound heart. Holmes extinguished the candle. "Sleep, Watson. The portrait will keep its own watch." But as we turned away, the silence broke once more with that thin, insistent pulse, slower now, deeper, as if aware it had been discovered. The pulse faded only when the dawn began to silver the curtains. Holmes remained motionless at his desk, the veiled portrait beside him like a sleeping conspirator. I had not slept either, I suspect, had he? When the first sound of the milk cart rattled through Baker Street, he rose, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. "Watson," he said, "there is a method behind this malevolence. The device was not placed there for amusement, but for a purpose, timed precisely to our client's descent into guilt." I poured him coffee, grateful for the routine. "You think the brother, Henry Vale, arranged it?" "I think he knew how to frighten Dayton. A man who believes his wife's image condemns him will soon condemn himself. But first we must learn what passed between those three, the husband, the wife, and the painter." The faint ticking on the mantel persisted, slower now, as though dying of its own deceit. Holmes lifted the cylinder once more, examined the fine cogwork, and slipped it into his pocket. "A craftsman's hand," he mused. "We shall inquire at a watchmaker's before confronting Mr. Vale." He turned sharply. "You will accompany me, Watson. Bring the portrait." We left the brownstone at 8:30, the shrouded frame borne in my arms like an unwilling passenger. The morning fog clung low, muting every sound save the steady rhythm of our steps, a continuation of that infernal pulse. Holmes hailed a cab, and within minutes we were moving east toward a narrow street in Clerkenwell lined with watchmakers and jewelers' workshops. He entered the third shop without hesitation, a modest establishment where an elderly man in spectacles bent over a tray of gears. "Mr. Colbury," Holmes greeted him, "you have supplied devices of ingenious design to certain gentlemen of the theatrical profession, have you not?" The man blinked, suspicious. "Sometimes, sir. Little tricks, moving eyes, mechanical birds, stage curiosities." Holmes placed the cylinder upon the counter. "Recognize the workmanship?" Colbury adjusted his lenses, peering close. "Aye, one of mine, though modified. Originally made for a puppet exhibit in Piccadilly, it produces a rhythmic motion through the bellows. This one, however, has been shortened and weighted to fit a hollow frame, perhaps. When did you sell it last?" The watchmaker frowned. 2 months ago to a Mr. Harcourt. Said he wished to study the mechanism for an
experiment in portrait realism. Holmes's expression did not change, but I caught the flicker of satisfaction. Harcourt again. Did he mention his patron? Only that he was restoring a painting for a private client by some gentleman of means. Outside, Holmes drew a deep breath. So, the artist, not the brother, was our engineer. The question becomes, whose will did he serve? We must see Henry Vale before nightfall. The cab carried us south through the damp air, the wheels striking puddles that echoed like slow heartbeats beneath our seats. Holmes remained silent, fingers tapping in rhythm with that sound. At last he said, "Note the pattern, Watson. A man dies not when his heart stops, but when another manipulates its rhythm. Our Mr. Dayton was meant to follow a mechanical pulse into madness, and you think Vale employed Harcourt to enact it? Possibly. Or perhaps Harcourt required Vale's grief to justify his experiment. Vanity weds vengeance in curious ways. By midday we reached Norwood. Vale's residence stood amid unkempt hedges, a once prosperous house fallen to melancholy. A servant, pale and reticent, admitted us to a drawing-room smelling faintly of turpentine. Henry Vale entered soon after, tall, angular, with the haunted pallor of those who nurse resentment as nourishment. Holmes inclined his head politely. "We come regarding the late Mrs. Dayton." Vale's eyes flickered. "Then you will speak to her husband, not to me." "Her husband has retained me," said Holmes, "because her portrait appears to live." Vale's mouth twisted. "Live? Then it does what she never could obey him." Holmes's tone remained serene. "You disliked your brother-in-law." "Disliked? I despised him. He took her from the family that cherished her and left her to die in that draughty house. If her face now mocks him, it is justice." "Justice or orchestration?" Holmes asked softly. "Did you commission Mr. Harcourt to restore the portrait?" Vale hesitated only a fraction. "Harcourt? I have not spoken to that man since my sister's death." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Then it was he who sought you out." "Did he visit you recently?" A pause. "He called last week," Vale admitted, offering to paint her likeness anew. "I refused. I thought it was morbid." Holmes paced to the window. "And did he mention that the original portrait had been altered?" "No." "Should I have cared?" "You should," Holmes said quietly, "for the mechanism within it bears his signature, yet the motive beats with your pulse." Vale's hands clenched. "You accuse me of tormenting that man. Why should I trouble myself with his guilt?" Holmes turned, eyes narrowing. "Because revenge rarely satisfies at a distance. It requires an audience." Vale's composure cracked. "If he suffers, he deserves it." Holmes inclined his head. "A moral verdict, not a denial. You have confirmed enough." As we rose to leave, a door at the far end opened, and a maid entered bearing a parcel wrapped in oilskin. She froze at the sight of us. Holmes's gaze fixed upon the package. "And that, my good woman?" She looked to her master. "The painter left it yesterday, sir. He said you were expecting it." Vale swore under his breath. Holmes stepped forward, unwrapping the oilskin to reveal a small, framed canvas, another portrait smaller, but unmistakably of the same woman. The expression, however, was no longer serene, but smiling faintly, almost mockingly. Holmes's voice was steel. "Watson, observe the eye's identical pigment, identical stroke. Painted from the same model, yet the varnish is fresh. Harcourt has been at work indeed." Vale stared, bewildered. "I never ordered this." "Then someone wishes both you and Dayton to believe the dead disapprove," Holmes said. "A double torment from a single brush." He turned abruptly to the servant. "Did this Harcourt say where he might next be found?" "At his studio near Grosvenor Place, sir. Then we shall disturb his art." As we departed, the wind caught the door, slamming it with a hollow reverberation that seemed to echo the ceaseless motif, pulse to pulse, deceit to deceit. Holmes spoke as we descended the steps. "Vale's denial is half-truth. He did not command the crime, but he consented to it. Harcourt manipulates their grief like a conductor. It is time we meet the maestro." We reached the street, the cabman's whip cracking like the final beat of that mechanical heart. Holmes climbed in beside me. "Watson, you will note," he said, "that our case no longer concerns a haunted painting, but a haunted man, and Harcourt plays his guilt as deftly as I play my violin." The horse lurched forward, wheels splashing through water, their rhythm quickening like a heartbeat driven toward revelation. The fog swallowed us, and from the parcel now resting at Holmes's feet came a faint, deliberate click-one, then silence. The sound clicked once more and ceased, leaving the faint impression of a heartbeat interrupted mid-breath. Holmes's gaze remained fixed upon the wrapped parcel at our feet. "Watson," he said quietly, We are in the presence of a man who plays at divinity-creating movement where life is gone. That click is his signature. Our cab rattled through the fog toward Grosvenor Place, the dull thud of hooves and wheels forming that same unholy rhythm we had heard within the portrait. Holmes's fingers tapped against his knee in time with it, mind already sprinting ahead. "He will expect us," he murmured. "A man who constructs illusion lives upon attention. We must grant it in a manner he does not choose." The studio stood behind a wrought-iron gate, its windows curtained, though a pale light glowed within. Holmes rang the bell twice softly, then once sharply. The third chime echoed through the hallway like a call to confession. A moment later, the door opened upon a figure as immaculate as any drawing-room guest, Julian Harcourt, the painter, slim and unnervingly poised. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, smiling faintly. "I wondered when the matter of Mr. Dayton's portrait would—"
"Lead you here? Do come in." Holmes inclined his head. "Your hospitality is as artful as your craft, Mr. Harcourt." The studio smelled of varnish and rose oil, its walls lined with canvases turned to face the room, not away from it, as if each subject wished to witness our intrusion. Light from a single skylight fell upon an easel draped in black cloth. Beneath it, a faint mechanical tick pulsed, slow and regular. Holmes gestured toward it. "A familiar rhythm, Watson, you hear?" Harcourt's smile deepened. "I see you've met my assistant of brass and breath, a little too useful for studying how shadows fall upon living faces." Holmes's tone was mild. "And for deceiving those who grieve." "I deceive no one," said Harcourt. "I reveal what they long to believe." Holmes circled him. "Then you admit you placed a device within Dayton's portrait?" "I admit nothing," Harcourt replied, "except that the dead leave impressions more durable than memory. I merely amplify them." Deception coiled in his words like incense smoke. Holmes halted before the shrouded easel. "If your conscience is as clear as your varnish, you will not object to my examining your latest work." "By all means," Harcourt said softly, "though I warn you it bites." Holmes lifted the cloth. A half-finished portrait of Clara Dayton stared back identically to the others, yet somehow more alive, the brushstrokes trembling on the verge of motion. Her gaze seemed to follow Holmes as he stepped aside. He spoke without looking away. "Watson, note the corner a small aperture near the stretcher bar." "Another mechanism, perhaps?" I knelt, finding the same metal cylinder fixed within, ticking faintly. "Identical to the one in Dayton's frame," I said. Holmes nodded, and wired to a lamp battery, no doubt heat to alter the varnish, motioned to simulate change. Ingenious and monstrous. Harcourt's laughter was low. "Monstrous? You misunderstand, Mr. Holmes. Art is truth extracted from deceit. I give my patrons what they desire most: movement, repentance, and memory. If Mr. Dayton's conscience paints cruelty upon his wife's lips, should I not allow it to appear?" Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Then it was not guilt you sought to expose, it was control. Someone commissioned you to drive him toward collapse. Who was it?" "No one," Harcourt said, "or rather, everyone who mourns and lies to themselves. I simply assisted the process." Holmes stepped close enough that the faint hum of the device filled the silence between them. "Then explain this. Your signature appears beneath a second portrait delivered yesterday to Mr. Vale." For the first time, Harcourt's composure faltered. "Vale received it." "He did," said Holmes, "without ordering it. That suggests you serve two masters, grief and profit." Harcourt turned away, adjusting his cuffs. "I have nothing to hide." Holmes's tone hardened. "Then allow me to search your workshop." "I cannot permit that." "You misunderstand again," Holmes said, already moving toward the curtained partition at the rear.
Permission is irrelevant when truth breathes through lies. He drew back the curtain. The sight within froze even my practiced calm. Along the wall hung 6 portraits, each the same woman, each expression subtly altered: tenderness, reproach, laughter, despair, malice, peace. Beneath each frame, a narrow shelf supported a ticking mechanism, the combined rhythm forming a single slow heartbeat that filled the room. Holmes's voice was barely a whisper, a sequence of emotion manufactured to order. Harcourt's eyes gleamed. A study of mortality, Doctor. The phases of a soul as imagined by the living. The final portrait completes the circle when guilt ripens to surrender. You mean death, Holmes said flatly. Harcourt bowed. Call it what you will. At that moment the door burst open and Charles Dayton himself stumbled in, wild-eyed, breathless. Holmes! They told me you were here. I had to come. She's changed the portrait again. I saw it before I left her mouth open as if to speak. Holmes caught him by the shoulders. Calm yourself. How did you learn our whereabouts? Harcourt sent me a note this morning that said he could explain everything if I came to his studio. I followed you instead. Holmes turned on the painter. So, Mr. Harcourt, you stage your final act before witnesses. Harcourt's gaze flicked between us, calculating. Perhaps it is better so. Truth requires an audience. Without warning, he crossed to the easel and snatched the ticking device from its base. The rhythm quickened, erratic, a heart in panic. Do you hear, gentlemen? It beats because you watch. It stops when belief ceases. That is all the supernatural ever was: observation. Put it down, Holmes commanded. But Harcourt laughed, twisting the cylinder open. A hiss of gas escaped, mingled with the sharp scent of ether. You cannot cage conscience, he whispered. It breathes in guilt. Holmes sprang forward, seizing his wrist. The device fell, rolling across the floor before striking the baseboard with a brittle click. The sound echoed through the studio, multiplied by the chorus of ticking portraits, until the room throbbed with rhythm. Harcourt sagged, gasping, the fumes already dulling his senses. Holmes flung open the window, letting in a gust that scattered dust and the faint toll of a distant church bell. Watson, get Dayton out! As I half-dragged our dazed client toward the door, I heard Holmes's voice, calm, precise, even amid chaos. Mr. Harcourt, you have painted yourself into your own illusion. When the rhythm ceases, so will your power. The devices slowed one by one, their beats irregular, failing. Silence crept back, heavy and absolute. Holmes stepped to the fallen cylinder, nudged it with his shoe. There lies your conscience, sir. Mechanized, extinguished. He turned to me. Watson, the man's sanity trembles but remains intact. We shall see that the law determines the rest. Behind him, one final tick broke the hush single. Sharp, defiant. Holmes looked up, eyes narrowing toward the shrouded portraits that still watched us. Curious, he murmured. Even the dead dislike being silenced. Holmes's words had scarcely faded when the final tick dissolved into the quiet scrape of canvas, shifting on its frame. The noise drew every eye upward. The uppermost portrait, Clara Dayton's smiling likeness, had moved. Only by an inch, yet unmistakably its corner lifted, as though the wall itself breathed beneath it. Dayton gave a strangled cry. "It's her! It's moving again!" "Hold him, Watson," Holmes ordered, striding forward. He pressed his palm flat against the painting's edge. The canvas quivered beneath his touch. A drought, perhaps no. The window is closed. The wall conceals something. He seized a palette knife from the nearby table and slid it along the seam where the frame met plaster. A faint metallic resistance answered him, followed by a dry clicking, the same rhythm as before, steady, deliberate, taunting. Harcourt stirred on the floor, half-conscious, muttering through clenched teeth. Don't open it! She'll vanish if you open it!" Holmes shot me a sharp glance. He fears exposure, not spirits. The sound originates within. He pried harder as the frame came away in his hand, revealing a shallow cavity lined with black cloth. Within lay another device larger than the others, its cogwork encased in wood, attached to thin wires that ran downward into the floorboards. "A relay," Holmes murmured. He intended remote operation. "Observe the wire disappears beneath this plank. Follow it, Watson." I knelt, tracing the wire to a narrow gap where the boards had been roughly prized and reset. "It leads toward the back wall." Holmes nodded. "To the next room, I'd wager. A studio of illusions requires hidden means." We entered the adjoining chamber, a dim storage space cluttered with crates and spent tubes of pigment. Against the far wall stood a narrow cupboard, its door ajar. Inside, a small battery box hummed faintly, the wire from the studio coiled around its terminals. Holmes disconnected it with a single motion. The ticking ceased at once, leaving a hollow quiet broken only by Dayton's unsteady breathing. He turned to our client. "You see, sir, your ghost dies as easily as the current withdrawn. Harcourt staged his miracle with electricity and deceit." Dayton sank into a chair, face pale as the gesso-stained floor. "Why? What could he gain from torturing me?" Holmes regarded the unconscious artist. "Fame, perhaps, for absolution. Yet I think another motive beats beneath the visible one." From the studio came a dull thud. We hurried back. Harcourt had dragged himself upright, clutching one of the smaller portraits. His eyes blazed with fevered triumph. "You cannot destroy her image," he gasped. "It is already perfect." "She forgave me through art." Holmes approached cautiously. "You confess, then, that you altered the portrait?" "I restored it," cried Harcourt. "Dayton's cruelty murdered her. I gave her back her soul. By making her haunt him, by making her seen." He hid her tenderness, locked it away. "I freed it upon the canvas." Holmes's voice remained even. "Then you served not Vale, but yourself." "I served love," Harcourt whispered, and pressed his hand against the painting's surface. "She breathes here still." At that touch, the varnish cracked, releasing a faint hiss, and a ripple spread across the paint, as if some trapped air escaped its prison. The sound echoed the pulse that had haunted us since the first night, a fragile, dying rhythm fading into silence. Holmes stooped, inspecting the crack. An unfortunate chemical reaction. Heat from the device forced the resin outward, yet how aptly symbolic the illusion expelling its own deceit. He looked up at Dayton. "You are free of her phantom, sir. What remains is grief, not guilt." Dayton's reply was a broken whisper. "And what becomes of him?" Holmes glanced toward Harcourt, whose strength was failing. "He will live long enough to explain to the magistrate his theology of torment." Outside, a constable's whistle cut through the air sharp, descending. I stepped to the window, and Inspector Lestrade was ascending the steps with 2 men. Holmes had summoned him earlier by note, anticipating the outcome. "In good time," Holmes muttered, drawing the curtain aside. "Lestrade, you arrive as our artist concludes his final exhibition." The inspector entered, surveying the scene with his usual mixture of suspicion and grudging admiration. "You do choose tidy crimes, Mr. Holmes. What's this one murder or madness?" "Neither," Holmes replied. "A demonstration in applied psychology. The instruments upon that wall were designed to suggest spectral alteration through heat and clockwork. Mr. Harcourt engineered them to unnerve our client." Lestrade snorted. "All this for a picture, for reputation," Holmes said. "When the public heard a painting could change its expression under guilt's gaze, they would flock to the artist who created it. And perhaps," he added, eyes narrowing, "he sought vengeance for a love refused." Dayton bowed his head, whispering, "She never returned his letters. I burned them." Holmes nodded once. "Then his revenge was to make you burn with remembrance. The law will extinguish what remains." Lestrade's men secured Harcourt and gathered the devices. The room grew quieter with each removal, until at last only one portrait remained upon the wall, the original still shrouded in brown paper. Holmes approached it, hand hovering above the frame. "Watson," he said softly, "truth, like art, seldom rests. Shall we see her face once more?" I hesitated. "Must we?" He smiled faintly. "Curiosity is the one vice I hope never to conquer." He lifted the paper. The woman's expression had altered yet again, but now it was serene, almost gentle, the faintest smile upon her lips. Holmes studied it for a long while. The human mind, when freed from coercion, reclaims proportion. Even pigment may seem merciful under honest light. Dayton whispered, "She looks at peace." "Then let her remain so," said Holmes, recovering the canvas. We left the studio under Lestrade's supervision. As the door closed behind us, a gust of wind stirred through the corridor, setting one loose sheet of drawing paper adrift across the floor. It fluttered once, twice, and came to rest against the base of the portrait with a sound like a faint, fading heartbeat. Holmes paused, listening. "The rhythm persists," he said quietly. "Even when the machine stops, the echo of its deceit lingers." Then turning to me, "Come, Watson. The living require our attention more than the painted dead." But as we stepped into the street, the faintest click issued from the studio behind us, one solitary beat, impossibly alive. Holmes stopped midway down the steps, head tilted like a man catching an echo. The rest of us could not. The solitary click from within the studio lingered in the fog, faint yet deliberate, a mechanical farewell. He murmured, "The mechanism is silent, the law has claimed the culprit, and still the sound persists. When deceit has no source, it clings to memory." We resumed our walk to Baker Street, the evening thick with mist and a curious stillness that made each passing cab sound distant, unreal. Dayton accompanied us, pale and wordless, clutching his hat as though it might steady his trembling hands. At last, Holmes spoke. "You will remain with us tonight. I wish to observe whether your torment has truly ended, or merely changed disguise." Dayton glanced toward him. "You think it could still follow me?" Holmes's reply was almost gentle. "Fear rarely travels alone, Mr. Dayton. It invites guilt for the company." Inside the familiar warmth of our sitting room, I felt a relief I had not known since the case began. Yet even here, as I set the portrait still shrouded in the corner by Holmes's chair, the faint scent of varnish clung to the air. The ticking of the mantel clock reawakened the motif, and with it came the memory of that unseen heart that had haunted our nights. Holmes poured brandy for all three of us. "A practical precaution," he said, passing Dayton his glass, "to calm the nerves before the mind resumes its sharper functions." Then he settled himself by the fire and fixed his gaze upon the veiled frame. "Watson," he said, recalled the moment Harcourt reached for his creation, the reverence, the terror. It was not mere guilt. There was another force upon him. I frowned. "Madness or mastery," Holmes replied. "He served a will stronger than vanity or vengeance." Dayton looked up sharply. "Another hand?" But Vail denied all part in it. "Just so," Holmes said, "and it is denial that interests me." He declared ignorance of the altered portrait. Yet how did Harcourt know our client's private guilt, the quarrels, the last words spoken to his wife before her death? Only one outside the marriage could have repeated them. I saw the realization dawn on Dayton's face. Henry was there that night. He
visited us unexpectedly. She was feverish, delirious, he claimed. He came to help the nurse, but after she died, he vanished for weeks. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Precisely. The hand behind the art remains unseen, but the rhythm of deceit continues. Harcourt may have painted the illusion, but Vale composed the score. A knock sounded below. Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes opened it, read it once, and passed it to me. Harcourt, dead heart failure in cell. Found at dawn. Lestrade. Dayton's glass shattered in his grip. Dead! Then it's over. Holmes's expression did not change, or it begins anew. Death seldom closes a case, it alters its tone. He rose, crossing to the portrait. We have one test yet to make. If this work was born of two men's guilt, its silence will not endure. He tugged the paper away. The firelight fell upon Clara Dayton's face. Her smile had softened further, eyes serene and distant. Yet something beneath the varnish shimmered faintly, an almost imperceptible tremor that caught the light like breath upon glass. Holmes bent closer. Watson, bring the lens. I handed it to him. He examined the surface minutely, tracing the pattern of the crackled glaze. Then softly here, beneath the paint, someone embedded another layer. Dayton leaned forward. Another painting? A miniature portrait, concealed beneath the outer one. Two canvases joined as one. He drew his penknife and with delicate precision lifted a fragment from the lower corner. The revelation struck us dumb. Beneath the upper likeness, the serene, forgiving face, lay another fainter image. Clara again, but her eyes cold, her mouth twisted in reproach. Holmes spoke almost to himself, the painter's confession concealed under his masterpiece. One face for the world, another for his conscience. When heat from the device expanded the varnish, the hidden layer breathed through, giving the illusion of change. Dayton's voice trembled. Then all I saw, all my terror was born from deceit. Holmes turned to him. Not deceit alone. It required guilt to give it meaning. Without that, it was merely paint. He covered the painting once more, almost tenderly. We shall deliver this to the Yard. Its evidence is both chemical and moral. Dayton rose unsteady. I cannot thank you. What words could you say? Holmes gestured toward the hearth. No gratitude is required. Merely acceptance. You are not haunted, Mr. Dayton. You are forgiven by truth, not by ghosts. The man nodded, eyes hollow, and left with the portrait under his arm. The door closed softly behind him. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The fire crackled, echoing faintly that relentless rhythm that had followed us through every revelation. At last I said, Holmes, do you believe the painting still moves? He considered, perhaps not physically, but conscience, once awakened, seldom returns to slumber. It will move in his dreams, not on his wall. He sank into his chair, steepling his fingers. We are not finished. Watson, there remains the question of Vale. Harcourt's death ends his art, not his complicity. I must confirm whether his silence is born of fear or of orchestration. You mean to visit him again? Tonight, I protested. Surely it can wait until morning. Deception seldom sleeps, Holmes replied. He rose, retrieving his coat. Besides, I have heard too much silence today. When it grows this deep, it conceals a sound waiting to strike again. I fetched my revolver without argument. As we stepped into the fog-bound street, the air was damp with the scent of rain and varnish, as though the ghost of the studio trailed us still. A distant carriage clattered somewhere in the mist, its wheels marking that familiar beat, steady, hollow, and inescapable. Holmes stopped beneath the lamplight. Listen, he said. The rhythm slowed, echoing faintly between the buildings. 1, 2, pause 1, 2. Not the random noise of traffic, but deliberate. patterned. "It follows us," I whispered. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Or leads us." We turned toward the sound. It drew us through the swirling fog toward Norwood once more, toward Henry Vale. The fog thickened as we followed the echoing rhythm down Norwood's sloping lane, the lamplight dissolving behind us like retreating memory. Holmes moved swiftly, every sense attuned. The beat that had lured us, two dull thuds, a pause, two more, grew sharper as we neared Vale's residence, the same sombre house where grief had once drawn its curtains. Holmes halted at the gate. "You hear it, Watson?" "Yes." "From within?" He nodded. "Then we are not the only visitors tonight." He pushed open the gate, its hinges giving a faint metallic groan, another note in the case's grim symphony. The sound from the house resolved itself into a rhythmic tapping metal upon wood. Holmes motioned for silence, then crept toward the side window, where a faint glow pulsed in time with the beat. Through a narrow slit in the curtain, we saw Henry Vale seated at his desk, a lamp beside him, and the portrait, Clara's, resting face down before him. He held a small hammer and struck the frame at measured intervals, as though driving nails into conscience itself. Holmes murmured, "Not madness method." He rapped sharply on the pane. Vale started, dropped the hammer, and turned. For an instant his face, gaunt fever, was illuminated full in the lamplight before he extinguished the flame. Then came the rustle of movement and the faint scrape of wood against wood. Holmes stepped back. He means to flee or conceal evidence. "Come, Watson." We forced the door. The latch gave way with a crack that echoed through the hall. The interior smelled of turpentine and damp ash. From the study came the unmistakable slide of a drawer and the soft clink of metal. Holmes crossed the threshold first. "Mr. Vale," he said evenly, "if your sister could witness this vigil, she would beg you to stop." Vale froze by the desk, the hammer still in hand. The portrait lay upright now, and though the lamplight had been
extinguished, the faint reflection from the street lamp outside revealed a face that seemed once more to shift with each flicker. Holmes approached slowly. "You cannot bury guilt beneath sound, sir. The hammer was your metronome, a vain attempt to drown the echo of what you did." Vale's voice cracked. "I did nothing." Harcourt twisted everything he said, and she still loved him. "And you believed him?" Holmes's tone remained soft, surgical. Enough to give him her letters, enough to let him exploit her image. The man's shoulders trembled. "I thought if the world saw her as she truly was, kind, gentle, perhaps her husband would suffer what I suffered." Holmes stepped nearer. "Then you conspired, however blindly. Harcourt's art required your confession. You gave him her likeness, her words, and he repaid you by turning them against both you and Dayton." Vale's eyes glistened with desperate anger. "He betrayed us. I only wished she was remembered with pity, not fear." "Yet you let him forge memory itself," Holmes said. "And now your conscience seeks rhythm to replace hers." A long silence followed, broken only by the faint tapping of the loose curtain cord against the window, a continuation of that infernal pulse. Holmes's gaze flicked toward the portrait. "Watson, note the outline along the edge. Darker, thicker. There's something sealed within." Vale's voice became a whisper. "Don't touch it." "Why not?" Holmes asked. "Because I sealed her letters there, every word she wrote before she died. I couldn't burn them." Holmes regarded him with pity. "You sealed her words behind her face. Then Harcourt found them, extracted their poison, and turned them to his art. The portrait's changes were nothing but a mirror of your hidden act. You trapped her voice inside her image." Vale sank to his knees, covering his ears as though to silence an invisible whisper. It was her handwriting, her scent. She was alive on the page. "I couldn't lose her twice." Holmes took the portrait gently and set it on the desk. Watson, the small knife. I handed it to him. With careful precision, he loosened the backing. Inside, a narrow envelope slid free, brittle with age. He opened it under the lamplight's frail return. The scent of lavender drifted into the room. Holmes read one line aloud, his voice low. "To my brother Henry, do not blame him. I will go willingly." Vale sobbed once, a sound both human and hollow. Holmes folded the note carefully. You see, she forgave before the end. There was no crime to avenge only sorrow multiplied by pride. He replaced the letter and spoke gently. The echo you heard these nights was your own remorse, striking like that hammer upon the wall of reason. Let it end now. Vale rose unsteadily. You'll turn this to the police? Holmes shook his head. No law punishes love misdirected, but conscience will finish the sentence begun by grief. Leave this house, Mr. Vale, and seek the living. Vale looked at him through tears. And what of her? Holmes replaced the covering over the portrait. Let her rest where silence does not accuse. For a moment the room was still. Then the curtain cord struck the window again, soft, deliberate one final beat as though the house exhaled. Vale turned toward it, startled. "Do you hear?" he whispered. Holmes's eyes never moved. Yes, the past saying farewell. He took my arm and guided me out. The fog swallowed the lane behind us, the rhythm fading with every step, until only the faintest memory of its pattern lingered in my ears. When we reached the main road, Holmes said quietly, "Each sound tonight was a confession metal, heart, or conscience. They differ only by the ear that hears them." I asked, "And the portrait now?" "It will cease its changes," he said. "The hidden words have been released. What remains is static, truth-dead pigment, quiet remorse." He drew his coat close against the chill. "Yet mark this, Watson illusions end, but echoes survive. If tomorrow the clock in Baker Street ticks louder than usual, it will be only that our minds, too, have learned the rhythm of guilt." I said nothing, but as we neared the glow of the next lamp, I fancied the faint click of our boots on the wet pavement and answered him steady, solemn, unending. Our steps rang hollow upon the pavement, the sound mingling with the drizzle that began to fall like a whisper, too timid to speak its meaning. Holmes's silence stretched as we approached Baker Street, yet his gait carried the restless rhythm of thought not finished but deepening. When at last we entered our familiar sitting room, the clock resumed its metronomic watch, echoing faintly the beat that had led us from Norwood. Holmes removed his gloves, placed them upon the mantel, and stood before the fire. "You observed, Watson," he said, "that every participant in this affair sought to preserve the dead. Each chose a different methodary, vengeance, denial. Yet all were bound by the same delusion that love resists decay. I poured the brandy in silence, and you, Holmes, you believe it does not?" He regarded the flames. "I believe truth survives longer than tenderness, though it is colder." The fire snapped, the sound recalled the brittle click of Harcourt's device, and the parallel unsettled me. "Then truth too can wound," I said. "Indeed," Holmes replied, "but only truth can close the wound properly. Dayton will sleep tonight for the first time in months, because deceit has been stripped of its machinery." I watched him for a moment, noting the fatigue beneath his precision. "And you, my friend? Will you sleep?" He smiled faintly. "When the rhythm ceases." A soft rapping came from the 3 slow knocks at our door, deliberate and spaced as though by design. I saw Holmes's eyes sharpen instantly. "Strange hour for callers," he murmured, and moved to open it. Charles Dayton stood there, hatless, rain upon his coat, the covered portrait once more in his hands. His expression was dazed, his voice a whisper. Forgive me, Mr. Holmes, I thought. It was gone. But it changed again. Holmes took the frame from him, setting it gently upon the table. Describe precisely what you saw. The smile, Dayton stammered, gone. Her lips parted just slightly, as if to speak. Holmes's gaze flicked to the clock. Watson, note the interval 3 hours since we left Vale. The chemical reaction should have long since subsided. He leaned closer to the shrouded painting, listening rather than looking. There. You hear it? At first I heard only the fire. Then faintly, beneath its low vibration, rhythmic, almost imperceptible. Tick-tick paused tick. Holmes muttered, impossible. Every mechanism was removed, unless he lifted the paper covering, revealing the portrait once more. Clara's features were calm, unaltered, yet the vibration persisted, faint as a pulse beneath flesh. Place your hand here, he told me. I obeyed and felt a slight warmth, as though something alive stirred within the layers of paint. Dayton recoiled. You see, it breathes again, Holmes said sharply. Control yourself. This is not haunting, it is heat. He turned toward the grate. Watson, close the damper. When I did so, the faint movement lessened, then ceased entirely. Holmes exhaled. Residual gas, perhaps trapped within the canvas when I cut it earlier. The warmth from the fire expanded it anew. A final exhalation from Harcourt's design. Dayton sank into a chair. So it ends. Holmes's tone was steady. It ends when you permit it. He motioned to me, and together we carried the portrait to the far corner near the window. Holmes drew open the sash, letting in the drizzle's cold breath. Let nature claim it. Moisture and time will silence all remaining ghosts. Dayton watched, lips trembling. I shall never hang it again. No, Holmes said softly. Better to remember truth than illusion. For a time we stood listening to the rain. Then Holmes turned, his voice quieter, almost weary. Watson, every sound that haunts the ear seeks harmony. Once found, it ceases. The human mind is no different. This case, more than most, proves that guilt requires an echo to survive. He gestured toward the clock, whose measured ticking filled the quiet room. That, he said, is the only pulse I trust. Dayton rose shakily. You have given me back my peace, Mr. Holmes. Holmes inclined his head. No, sir. I merely identified the noise preventing it. When our client had gone, Holmes remained at the window, watching the rain bead against the glass. I thought the matter concluded, yet as I reached to stoke the fire, a faint sound halted me. It came from the corner where the portrait rested soft, intermittent. Not the mechanical tick we knew, but a fragile patter, as if the rain itself struck rhythm upon the frame. Holmes turned sharply. Watson, I hear it. He crossed the room, bent low, then straightened, eyes distant. Only droplets, perhaps, but how precisely they fall. He drew the curtain back over the frame and returned to his chair. Even the elements conspire in
irony, he said. A man builds a ghost of sound and nature imitates it with water and wood. The world enjoys a jest, my dear Watson, though seldom a kind one. I could not shake the sense of unfinished music in the air. Do you think Vale will live quietly now? His silence will be punishment enough, Holmes said. Men who confine their truth behind others' faces find that even the stillest night resounds with it. He lifted his violin from its stand, tuned one string with meticulous care, and drew the bow once across it. The note was low, steady, almost identical to the rain's rhythm. He smiled faintly. You see, Watson, the pulse continues, but in a different key. Let it play. The sound lingered in the room, melancholy, human, and somehow forgiving. For the first time since the affair began, I felt the tension ease, replaced by something near to peace. Yet even as the last vibration died upon the string, a soft click came from the mantel clock slightly out of rhythm. Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Curious," he murmured. "I wound it not an hour ago." The clock answered with another solitary beat, then another, slower still, each echoing the faint rhythm we had tried so hard to forget. Holmes regarded it with wry composure. "Perhaps, Watson, we have taught the house our story." Then, almost gently, he added, "Let it keep time with conscience. It will never lose an hour." The final tick came louder, resonant, and then stopped utterly. The silence that followed that final tick was of such density it seemed to fill the very air between us. Holmes's gaze remained upon the motionless clock. He did not move for a full minute. Then quietly, "Curious, is it not, Watson? Even mechanisms choose their moments of conscience." I attempted a smile. "A coincidence, surely." "Coincidence is merely causality we have yet to define," he said, and rose. "Observe." He lifted the glass dome from the clock, bent close, and turned the minute hand back a fraction. The escapement released one tentative click, then fell still again. It resists movement. The spring is fully wound, yet refuses to breathe. Harcourt's ghost could not have chosen better symbolism. He replaced the dome and drew his hand across the mantel as though wiping away unseen dust. We will leave it, a reminder that silence, too, has a pulse. I fetched my notes, intending to record the evening's final deductions, but Holmes stopped me with a raised hand. "Not yet, my dear fellow. A single thread remains untied." I looked up. Which thread could that be? "Harcourt is dead," Vale exposed. "Dayton free." He turned toward the rain-misted window. And yet the telegram from Lestrade omitted one crucial fact. Did it not strike you as strange that a man found dead in his cell left no implements, no markings, no residue of poison, yet bore upon his wrist a faint circular bruise? I frowned. "A bruise? You never mentioned it." "I withheld it," Holmes said, "because the mark's pattern resembled the rim of a keyring, the very key used to wind."
His infernal devices, understanding, dawned slowly. Then someone visited him before his death. Precisely. Lestrade assumed heart failure, and I assumed orchestration. There is no evidence Vale left Norwood tonight, yet the interval between our departure and Harcourt's death allows time for one other visitor. The turnkey? Holmes shook his head. No ordinary jailer would risk such secrecy. No, Watson. The visitor was someone with influence, perhaps even sympathy. Vale's guilt is purged, Dayton's peace restored, yet both owe their release to Harcourt's art. One might imagine a final meeting not to accuse, but to forgive. I felt a chill. "You believe Vale killed him?" Holmes's reply was quiet. Killed or released, a matter of perspective. The rain intensified, drumming faintly on the Panisa continuation of the clock's rhythm, translated by nature. Holmes paced before the hearth, his shadow long and restless. If my suspicion is correct, the law will find nothing. Vale will say Harcourt's heart simply ceased. But the bruise tells another tale, a looped strap, tightened by hand, a few seconds of pressure, and eternal silence. Fitting, perhaps, that the artist, who feigned life through sound, should die by the absence of it. He stopped, listening again to the rain. "Do you hear it, Watson? The rhythm returns to life, imitating deceit." I set down my pen. "Holmes, surely this goes beyond deduction. You cannot prove it." "Nor would I wish to," he said. "Justice in this instance is already balanced. The painter's art destroyed two souls. Perhaps one sought to end the echo." The words lingered between us until a soft knock at the door interrupted. Mrs. Hudson entered, holding a small envelope. "Delivered just now, sir. No name, only the address." Holmes took it, examined the seal, unmarked, plain. He broke it open and read in silence. I saw his eyes narrow, then soften. He passed it to me. The note contained but a single line, written in a fine, tremulous hand. "The sound has stopped. Let her rest." H. Holmes folded it with care. Vale, of course. The final admission. No threats, no fear, merely closure. Then it is truly over. "Yes," he said, though his tone carried neither relief nor triumph. "But listen once more." The rain had dwindled to drizzle, yet within that hush I fancied a faint continuation of the rhythm far off, irregular, but undeniably real. "It persists," I murmured. Holmes smiled faintly. "Because we remember it. Memory, like rhythm, repeats until forgiven." He crossed to the violin, drew the bow once across a single string, and matched the faint sound exactly. The resonance filled the room low, humane, almost compassionate. "You see, Watson, there lies the difference between guilt and art. One imprisons, the other releases. Tonight, perhaps, both have done their work." He replaced the instrument gently. "Mark my words, this affair will fade from public memory, but its lesson will not. Each of us paints a portrait upon time's canvas. The question is whether we live beneath one face or two." I said nothing. The fire's glow had dimmed to amber, and the shadows along the ceiling pulsed faintly with the rhythm of that invisible heart which had haunted the case from its first beat. Holmes refilled his pipe, struck a match, and let the small flare mirror that pulse once more. "Curious, isn't it," he mused, "that every story begins and ends with the same sound as the first and final breath? All our investigations merely concern what lies between." He sank into his chair, the match dying between his fingers. "You may record it now, Watson. Title it as you wish, but ensure the pulse remains." I took up my pen. The scratch upon the paper fell naturally into the cadence of that remembered beat, steady, unrelenting. In that sound I heard the case itself. The portrait's false life, the painter's deception, the husband's remorse, the brother's vengeance, and the detective's comprehension, all drawn together by a rhythm no man could silence. Holmes closed his eyes. There. The hour strikes again, though no bell sounds. And indeed, from the clock silent for so long came a single, solemn note, as though time itself had acknowledged his words. The single chime quivered through the room like a sigh, its resonance hanging in the air between us. Holmes did not move, nor did I. The flame of the lamp wavered once, caught its balance, and steadied. Then Holmes said very softly, "That was not the clock, Watson." I looked up sharply. "Not the clock." He shook his head. "Listen." A second chime followed, lighter, more metallic, and unmistakably distant. It seemed to rise from below, from the very boards of the room. For a moment, we both remained still. Then Holmes stood and tapped the floor with his heel. "The house remembers," he murmured, "or perhaps it merely replies." He crossed to the wall where Dayton's portrait had stood the previous night. The corner of the rug was slightly lifted. Holmes crouched, lifted it, and exposed a narrow seam in the floorboards, an old join sealed by dust. "You may recall," he said, "that this building predates us by half a century, and if I'm not mistaken, the same resonance could be produced by a hollow space beneath." I fetched a poker while he wedged the board loose. Beneath lay a small compartment no larger than a writing case. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth stiff with age, was a square of canvas cut roughly, edges frayed. Holmes drew it out and spread it upon the desk. The image upon it faded almost beyond recognition, yet I could discern the unmistakable outline of a woman's eyes. "Another portrait?" I exclaimed. "More the original," said Holmes quietly. "Look here, same gaze, same composition, This is Harcourt's first study, Watson, hidden long before Dayton ever sat in his chair, the very embryo of his deceit. He examined the edges closely. Notice how the cut aligns with the upper quadrant of the later painting. When he restored the final portrait, he overlaid this fragment, embedding his earlier, rejected work beneath the fresh canvas. Thus the face that seemed to change was, in fact, two faces, one dormant, until heat and moisture released it. The revelation struck me as silent. Then even death had an echo before the case began. Holmes smiled faintly. Indeed, every illusion begins as a forgotten truth. He turned the fragment over. Upon the reverse, in smudged pencil, were words scarcely legible. "Forgive me the second face." Holmes read them aloud. His confession, written before the fraud was born. He foresaw the crime he would commit and buried its seed within the very medium of his art. He set the canvas down. So ends the painter's experiment, an honest warning disguised as guilt. Remarkable, is it not, how conscience anticipates its own awakening? The fire hissed, and a log collapsed inward, releasing a gentle pop. The rhythm's ghost revived. I said quietly, "Then this fragment was the true heart of the case." Holmes nodded. "Yes. The mechanical devices, the changing expressions, Vale's vengeance, all were ripples. But this is the stone that made them." He lifted the fragment once more and studied it by the firelight. The woman's eyes seemed alive even now, faint but watchful. "She has looked upon us through every deception," he murmured, "first through Harcourt's vanity, then through Vale's resentment, and finally through Dayton's grief. And now she looks upon the truth itself." I could not help but feel a strange chill. "What will you do with it?" "Return it to Scotland Yard," he said, though his tone suggested reluctance. "Though I suspect Lestrade will deem it a curiosity rather than evidence. He will hang it in a drawer, and the pulse will fade. Perhaps that is best." He rolled the canvas carefully, replaced it in the oilcloth, and restored the board to its place. "There. Let the floor keep what the walls could not." When he rose, I saw the fatigue in him, the rare kind that no sleep could cure. He leaned against the mantel, watching the clock resume its steady rhythm. "You may set down the conclusion now, Watson," he said quietly. "But omit my speculation on Vale's final act. The Yard will call Harcourt's death natural, and I shall not contradict them." "Even if you are certain?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Certainty, my dear fellow, is an indulgence for the untested. Let truth breathe on its own for once." He moved to the window. Outside, dawn had begun to stir behind the clouds, tinting the fog with the faintest silver. The city exhaled the slow, deep breath of millions waking to indifferent routine. Holmes watched it without expression. "You know," he said after a moment, "there was one flaw in Harcourt's philosophy. He sought to give art a pulse, believing life required rhythm. But life, Watson, is defined not by rhythm but by pause, the stillness between the beats. Without it, all sound is chaos." He turned toward me, and the firelight caught the sharp planes of his face. "That, I think, is our conclusion," I said softly. "And the portrait?" He smiled. "Let it remain unseen. Some truths should not return to light. They have served their purpose." The clock struck the half-hour then, the sound clear, untroubled. Holmes inclined his head toward it, as one acknowledges an equal. "There, Watson, time affirms our reasoning." I wrote the last line of my notes as the fire sank to embers. When I glanced up, Holmes had resumed his violin, bow poised, but unmoving. "One final question," I ventured. "If guilt can echo beyond death, what then becomes of forgiveness?" He drew the bow across the string, a single note, soft as breath, rising and falling in perfect cadence. It learns to keep time, he said. The sound lingered, fading not into silence, but into calm. The clock followed, steady and sure. And so ended the case of the portrait that changed its face not with revelation, but with understanding. The room held its peace. The rain had stopped. In the hush, the faintest echo of that violin note no longer haunting, merely human, seemed to breathe once more and rest.